Okay, if we can go ahead and get started, please, so I can have a seat. Let me begin by saying it's an honor and privilege to have Senator Mark Warner here with us today. He's long been a champion for open data. As a former governor and businessman, he recognizes its value to business, to transparent and effective government, and to our society. As chairman of the Finance Subcommittee on Fiscal Responsibility and Economic Growth, and as chairman of the Budget Committee Task Force on Government Performance, he led the charge for passage of the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act, or DATA Act, which will create a standardized and accessible reporting system on federal expenditures. A real coup for the open data movement and a real step forward for better, smarter government. We appreciate all the work he and his staff, in particular Amy Edwards, put into coordinating and hosting this event. Without further ado, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Senator Mark Warner. We look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the good work you all are doing in Commerce. Great to see the panel and friends in this room. You know, for me, as kind of a budget nerd, this is like, you're my peeps. So I'm excited about this, and we're going to the Finance Committee on extenders, and we have the President of Ukraine earlier, and we're dealing with the CR coming up. So to get a chance to take a moment to talk about a topic that may not be the tips of every policymaker, but as somebody who's spent longer in business than I have in government, the utilization of data in a way that can improve the quality of services we provide for Americans, but also as a revenue source for a whole host of businesses. Kathleen, being an example, is something I think that's very important. I want to again thank the Department of Commerce and the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation for putting this together, and we gave Amy appropriate credit. She does a great job for me on this. And this is something that I come to with a passion, both from having still spent longer in business than I have in politics. I was in the telecom and IT industry and the venture business, where data was what drove a lot of what we worked on, and then from the standpoint of being governor when Virginia was an best managed state, it was in many ways because we drove and dug into the data first. Mark gave this introduction. I do think when the budget task force that government performance was created, and they gave me the chairmanship, there was an attempt, they thought I might be a little disruptive, so they thought, throw Warner in that patch over there, because government performance will kind of never get anybody too excited. But I think we've made some progress. One of the rarely cited parts of the ACA, no matter what you feel about ACA or Obamacare, the only bipartisan amendment on the ACA was a group of amendments that were called at that point kind of freshman senators' amendments that actually had to be made senators, and others were bipartisan. And part of that didn't go as far as we would like, but it really pushed CMS to start getting out in a privacy protected way, the CMS data. If there is ever an industry that needs more transparency, healthcare falls dead center in that space. And I think while there's many things in ACA that needs to get dealt with and improved, many of the macro trends are good, and many of the macro trends are getting good because I think we've got some good data. On the task force, on the budget committee, we've looked at issues that move from use of data to improve accountability and transparency for the federal government. I'll come back to that in a moment. Performance data, what really works. We'll talk for a moment about the data bill, and then actually a couple of items that while not dead center in this space, are indirectly related. In a group like this, let me talk about my first piece of legislation that I'm proud to have gotten passed. I always use this as a metric to determine how much of data and performance nerds you are. How many of you have heard of GIPRA? Well, that's pretty good. I was hoping, GIPRA, which I like to go out and talk about, is the littlest bill that nobody's ever heard of. More from the management side than simply the budget side and the data side, but it was really an important step. Basically did a variety of things, but two things I think are important. Tries to say to government agencies, and this is not all government agencies' faults, it's oftentimes Congress's fault, where every bill we add another goal for a department or an agency, and anybody who's done management knows if you've got 50 goals or 50 directives, you really have no focus. So this was an attempt in a law to actually take some of the good work from Bush 43 and from Obama on their management reforms and say, let's really find a way where government departments and agencies have to report on a quarterly basis, against measurable goals. Usually 3 to 5 ought to be the max. And while it's, the implementation has not been nearly as quickly as I'd hoped, I think it's an important tool and a step forward. What also it did, and this we got great pushback actually from the administration on this, and this in an area, the biggest obsession in this job is getting our country's balance sheet right. That ultimately means we have to find ways to do more with less. That also means tax reform and entitlement reform. When you do more with less on the discretionary side, rather than the stupidity on steroids approach of sequestration, we ought to actually use some of these financial pressures to see if we can deliver better value for Americans at better rates. Part of what GIPRA did as well was said for every agency, it was the first time ever, it said you've got to report not only your top performing programs, but also your least performing programs. There is a function that goes on at O&B that does that, but I think oftentimes people, Mark, you would know, at the agency level, don't feel that involved with. This is actually where the agency leadership by department, by agency can say, okay, we're going to come clean with where we think we've got problems and where we can make improvement. So that was GIPRA. Data, something that I'm proud of. I'm in the re-election mode. And sometimes people say, well, are you really bipartisan? For political insiders, I say, hey, I'm proud to have partnered with Darrell Issa on this bill. So if that doesn't give my bipartisan bona fide, he's good. Darrell was a great partner. He's been a leader in this space as well. Our original data bill would have gone further than what we ended up with, but we made a dramatic step forward. And some of our colleagues on the agency side, particularly DoD side, have talked about the difficulties, but it makes no sense that we have 200 different financial reporting systems just inside DoD. So, what the data bill will do is really try to build upon some of the good work that's already been done with USAspending.gov and say, let's take it to the next level. I gave then Senator Obama and Tom Coburn credit years ago for getting us started, but this really is kind of that kind of approach, 2.0 or 3.0. The top line, out in my state description is, one, proud of that this has been called the most significant transparency in government since the Freedom of Information Act. Cite that. I'm not sure who said that, but I keep citing it everywhere. I mean, you've got to make sure you got the site right. But it really does conceptually say you got to be able to Google your tax dollar and follow it all the way down to the programmatic level. And clearly there are challenges in terms of duplicate reporting when you get to university levels and other things that have to be worked through. But we've got to move. And this just, I don't want to overstate the case. This does not take us all the way there, but it starts us down the path towards a movement towards government-wide financial data standards. It makes no sense for us as policymakers to try to evaluate programs where something appears at one point as a grant, another point as an expenditure, and you cross collateralization of these items in a way that can make any rational sense on where and how our dollars are spent. It is crazy. So clearer and stronger financial data standards, number one. And the second is you just got to improve the data quality. And you have to make it uniform. This is something that is an enormous challenge. And I've got to after I'm done, aren't going to be able to stay for the whole panel. Amy's going to stay. But let me say, I am wide open for business on how we can continue to move further along on data quality. You know, when you add GIPRAs though, and when you add data bills, one of the things I say for those of you who work on the inside the federal enterprise, I am very sensitive to the fact that, you know, Congress is always additive to your work and responsibilities and never comes back and says, all right, how do we cut back? One of the things that we did in GIPRA was an attempt, and frankly, we've not been as successful as I'd like to say, let's see if we can get rid of up to 10% of reporting requirements, because you should not be spending 20, 30, 40% of your job filling out forms that may or may not ever be read. So on a very small, more symbolic, but I think important piece, we've just done a recent bill with Kelly Ayotte that actually passed on report elimination. You know, the number of reports that Congress requires that then sit on the shelf. I managed to even offend, I think, some people in the Humane Society. I didn't mean to when I said maybe the dog and cat fur Violation Protection Act reports that nobody's read in years ought to be one of those reports that ought to be eliminated. Within the wasn't in Social Security, the number of hours that are spent on people doing a report on just the printing activities of the Social Security Administration. You know, we need your help. We've kind of put a first marker down. We've got another piece of legislation. The first one's passed the Senate. It will pass the House in an earlier version. So, you know, please help us on ways that we can say to the federal workforce that as we are trying to refine and get better data, we're also trying to diminish your reporting requirements. Last point, and I know my time's about up. I think this is an enormous economic opportunity. I was some of you know, a venture capitalist in business longer than in politics. I always remember back in 1982, as I was getting into the wireless industry, I'd gone to law school at Harvard, and all my classmates who were big fancy law firms, all to a person said to me, you know, Warner, get a real job. Who's going to want a car phone? They're still practicing law and billing in 6-minute increments, and you know, I started Nextel. I think big data, while there are enormous privacy issues that have to be sorted through, and better utilization of data, I think the numbers are what, 24 billion. I think this year, I think that's low. I think this is, if I had to pick one of the top 5 growth areas, if I was starting my career, get on the business side, utilization of data would be one. And I want to close with this idea, which I'd love your help on as well. And it's a bill I got with Ron Wyden and Marco Rubio. What I've heard in the last 2 years running around Virginia from folks, perhaps more than any other issue, even more than Obamacare, is the crushing amounts of student debt. I'm a first generation in my family college graduate. I failed a couple times before I was successful, but I got out of college and law school with a total of $15,000 worth of debt. If I come out with $70,000 or $80,000 for lending people right now, or I'm not sure what to take in those chances. I really believe we are potentially crushing a generation of young people, both in terms of startup, housing, starting families, and there are a variety of solution sets, from refinancing to income-based repayment to ideas where you could take part of somebody's salary and apply it pre-tax against debt. But there's also something that for this group, and with Kathleen, what you all have done with Zillow is a great role model of what Travelocity and other travel websites have done in the travel sector. We've got a bill that simply says no before you go. Why is there not right now, since we already collect most of this data, a single user-friendly, commercially driven website that would take every college, every graduate program, every community college, every career and technical education program, and put down in clear, readable fashion, you know, what's your chances of graduating, how long will it take, how much debt, get rid of some of the mystery of what's out there in terms of student aid and so forth. I mean, I, for one, would be loath to recommend anybody going to law school these days if you're not in the top 20 law firm, because your chances of coming out with other than debt and a job are very low. If you have that data out there that shows if you go into medical technology at a community college, you have a 90% placement rate at $40,000 to $80,000 starting jobs, it doesn't tell anybody that you have to do that, but a better informed consumers in terms of higher education could be a remarkable aspect. I mean, I know if I've been very lucky, but if I'd really known what the chances, as my middle daughter has, of an art history of actually getting a job and what it pays, it might have caused a family discussion in 18 that we didn't have. So this is a huge opportunistic area. It is an area where we can provide better value for our citizens. It is an idea where we can provide enormous economic opportunities, and it's a way that we can also make sure that in a time of limited financial resources, those of us who are policymakers can try to make smarter rather than the kind of stupidity type decisions like sequestration. So again, Mark, thank you for the opportunity to be here. My apologies on stepping out, but I am anxious to get the report. And if you've got ideas that aren't touched today, Amy, raise your hand again. You're not moving, you're staying. A lot more to be done in this space. Thank you all very much. I'm going to a fundraiser. I'm much rather
Great. Well, I think those were excellent remarks to help kind of kick off this discussion. My name is Daniel Castro. I'm the director of the Center for Data Innovation, which is hosting this event. If you don't know the center, we're a relatively new, nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy think tank. We're really focusing on this question: how do we move from where we are today to all of these opportunities that we see with big data and analytics, and how public policy can help drive us and get us to that place. If you are tweeting this event, we're using hashtag data innovation. I don't know if the signal was very good down here. If you're doing that and you want to follow along online, you can do that as well. The goal of today's event is really to discuss the unique and valuable role that government data has on our economy. And we've kind of seen this already. We're really looking at how we can improve it. How we can improve it going forward in terms of the quality, in terms of the content, in terms of its use. And this is a critically important area. As government agencies, especially many of the government statistical agencies, create these valuable data sets. They're used to guide policy decisions. They're used to guide business decisions, business investments, and they're really used just as a platform for innovation in lots of different sectors. To help discuss all these issues, we have a really fantastic panel today that are working in both the private sector and the public sector. And we have copies of everyone's bios on the table, so I'm just going to very briefly introduce our panelists. First, we have Dr. Mark Doms, who is the Undersecretary for Economic Affairs at the U.S. Department of Commerce. To his left is Kathleen Phillips, the Chief Operating Officer at Zillow. Next to her is Tom Schenk, Chief Data Officer with the City of Chicago. And at the end of the table is Stephen Adler, the Chief Information Strategist at IBM. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. So first what we're going to do is Dr. Doms is going to do a presentation about this report. It's out there. If you haven't gotten it, you should definitely take a look at it. That's trying to measure what's this impact of government data. So why don't we start with you, Mark?
Okay, I'll just stay, if that's okay. So thanks, Daniel. Thanks for the Center for Data Innovation for all your work putting this event together. Thanks again to the Senator Warner staff for getting us this room and hosting this great event. Now, especially want to thank the panelists for coming here today. So everybody to my left came here from out of town to be here, from the West Coast to a little bit south of here to the Northeast. So we really, in the Midwest, we really appreciate you taking so much time to be here. We really do appreciate it. So when it comes to data in the next 5 minutes and the value of data, I just want to make two really fundamental points. And the first point is that data really is driving our economy today, and we expect that to continue until tomorrow and the day after for years and years to come. And data is creating businesses, it's creating industries, and it's creating a lot of jobs. That's the first point. The second point is that although it's not widely known, but businesses rely heavily on data that the government provides, and especially in the areas of our population, on our economy, on our climate, just to mention just 3 examples. And when government produces this information, we give it away to everybody at little or no cost. And so that the private sector, like those folks some to my left, can take it and do really great, amazing things with it. So let me talk about the economy, the first point, just a little bit more. So we all hear about data a lot these days. We hear about big data, massive data, data analytics, data optimization, open data, so on and so forth. But what does that kind of really mean? So first, as an economist, the way I think about this is you have a number of businesses, say like Zillow and IBM, for instance, that are really kind of just in the data business, right? And so that's really important. That's really important for the economy because if you look over the past 10 years, the rate of job growth in businesses like IBM and Zillow, they've been growing faster at a rate of 6 times faster than the economy as a whole. This is a growing sector of our economy. So there's just the quantity of jobs and the job growth rate is point number one. Point number two is that these are really good jobs. So if you look at people who are employed in these industries, they pay about 73% more than the economy as a whole. Okay, so these are really high-paying jobs. And that's not surprising because you hear all these anecdotes for just the high demand for people who really know how to use data and how to analyze data. So this is a growing part of the economy. This is a part of the economy where the United States kind of really leads the world. And so this is why it really deserves our special attention. So the private sector, the other part of the private sector, which is just fascinating when it comes to data, is then everybody else. So the U.S. economy is about 6 million businesses. So we have some businesses that that are really in the data business, but then we have all the other businesses that are in the data using business, and Senator Warner alluded to this. Everybody's getting into the data analysis game. Sometimes they'll contract out, but private companies are going to do it in-house. And when you have all these companies using all this information, they're going to become more efficient. They're going to become more competitive. And what do we know about history? Companies that are more competitive gain market share and they add jobs. That's how economic growth happens. So all businesses really have to get smarter and get smarter by smartly using data. Okay, so that's kind of point number one. Data is really important for the economy. Point number two then is kind of what's the role of government in all of this. And when it comes to the government, we really provide a lot of benchmark fundamental information about our population, about our economy, and our climate. Again, those are just the 3 examples that I'm going to talk about today. Maybe we can have some more. We can talk about others during the question and answer period. So when it comes to our population data, for instance, for those of you who work on Capitol Hill, you use our population data to know about your districts or about your states and how that population is changing over time. Businesses want to know about population because they want to know where their potential customers are. They want to know where their potential workforces are. So they use this information extensively in making their decisions. And again, when businesses make smart, informed decisions, then they're going to become more competitive, they're going to survive, they're going to add jobs. That's, again, kind of very good for the economy. And when we look at the population data, we're really the only game in town. What I mean by that is the U.S. government, we have the wherewithal and we have the incentive to get really good information on our entire population. North, south, east, west, rich, poor, all racial groups, veterans, computer programmers, everybody. That's who we really care about. And we're the only people with the incentive to have this comprehensive information about our population and how it's changing over time. So then the second area I want to talk about is just then economic data. So businesses need to know what's happening to the economy today so they can better forecast and better plan for what they're going to do tomorrow. So businesses make decisions about investment and hiring. It's all based on what they think is going to happen in the future. If you don't know what's happening today with your industry or the economy as a whole, you have a much rougher idea, a much worse idea of what's going to happen in the future. So a lot of businesses, directly and indirectly, also use the economic data. And again, given that there's 6 million businesses, thousands of industries, about 150 million workers, kind of the U.S. government, we're the only entity that has the incentive and the wherewithal and the expertise to accurately measure what's happening in the U.S. economy. So again, there's no private sector actor out there who has the incentive to have this really objective and credible information like we have just on the population. And then finally, the last example I just want to talk about is climate information. So there's lots of interesting things that's happening at the local level and also in the private sector with climate. But when it comes to accurately measuring what's happening to our weather and to our climate, the good folks at the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, which is also funded the Department of Commerce, they provide just tons and tons of information. They have about 29 terabytes of data a day about the climate. And what's the great good news story here is then that you as consumers, you can get this information really easily because the private sector has really taken this data and applied it. So when you want to know what the weather is, you look at an app on your smartphone, maybe it's WeatherBug, you see a mention to me, or that is his favorite, or you go to weather.com or any number. But a lot of that data you see actually comes from the U.S. government. The private sector is very good about taking that data, adding some value to it, making it very accessible. But again, fundamental building blocks of a lot of these industries that that are in the data space, rely on our data to really kind of understand what's the benchmark. So we think there's a lot of value there. And as the senator mentioned, and as Daniel mentioned, we have this report, and the authors are here too. It just really begins to talk about what is the value of the data that we provide. And we want to be able to make a good argument that this is really good use of taxpayer dollars. So it's like 3 cents per person a day to look at all the state and federal statistical agencies, for instance. But there are so many decisions that are made in our economy. Just if you look at how much investment is done every year, it's about $2.5 trillion, right? And so if our budgets are just in the billions, for instance, I mean, that's just a huge rate of return in terms of the value that we're providing to society as a whole. So again, Daniel, thank you for collaborating this and organizing this. I look forward to hearing this.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. And for those of you in the room, we have a couple of seats up front if you want to move up. We also have some lunches on the side. I know some people didn't see them or grab them, but information is always useful. So if you didn't back there, please feel free to grab it. I just want to make a few remarks about some of the kind of emerging alternatives to government data and how we're seeing this really interesting intersection of big data from the private sector and then all this government data. And I think that raises really interesting questions about kind of where we go forward and its role in the future. And so to kind of set this up, I just want to talk briefly about the Ebola outbreak. If you follow this, right now there's been about 4,000 cases in West Africa, about 50% fatality rate. And when you're talking about infectious diseases, knowing information sooner is really important. And so if you follow the story, one of the kind of interesting developments that came out of this was that the World Health Organization actually identified the current Ebola outbreak beginning after HealthMap, which was this project set up as a data analytics project set up between Harvard Medical School and Boston Children's Hospital. And they were pulling in data from social media, from social networks, public health officials, from public local news accounts, as well as from official government sources. So it was really interesting. They were ahead of the curve by about 8 days, and of course, later on, it was validated that this was important. So I think there are at least 3 reasons why these alternative data sources matter. So one is the immediacy, right? They were able to get information sooner using these alternative sources. The second benefit here is redundancy. So you have multiple sources of data, so you're kind of validating the signal. You have more confidence that you're probably accurate. And the third is coverage, so you avoid some of the sampling biases. But of course, there's a number of limitations here as well. So, broader coverage doesn't actually mean completeness. And this is a really important issue. Out back, we had this report called Data Poverty in America that we just released last week, which argues that we're likely to see the rise of a data divide, just like we've had a digital divide, where there's kind of gaps between data-rich and data-poor communities. And that this might even cluster geographically. So we kind of posited that we might have data deserts, just like we have food deserts for areas of the country characterized by a lack of access to high-quality data about individuals or their community. And of course, this might really matter when we start talking about all the ways that data is being used to provide services and make decisions about the world. Another problem or limitation with non-government data sources is that the incentives for collection might not align with the actual needs. So important data might not be collected, or certain granularity of data might be omitted. And third is the quality might not be at the right level. So the quality that you need for advertising is a little bit different than if you're making decisions about social services. So I think all this kind of raises the question, what's government's role going forward? How does this kind of big data in the private sector mesh with government? So I think there's a few important roles here. One is government data is providing an incredibly important baseline for these alternative sources. Right? So you don't actually know if these alternative sources are correct unless you have the data from registration. So this is important. I think this is really important too going forward because the models change, right? These models, the predictors and the accuracy of those change over time. So you always need the government data to establish a baseline. And second, you have government playing a really important role in validating findings. So in the Ebola outbreak, it wasn't enough that we suspected there was an outbreak. We actually had, of course, the medical community and local government officials on the ground seeing that this was real and sending that data back. And that's really important. Third is setting the standard for inclusion. So there's something that the government's always tried to do is make sure no community is invisible. So when we're talking about the statistics, going out and making sure we find open populations, doing extra work to make sure homeless population, for example, are not overlooked. And we need to still have this kind of public and private way of driving the principles. And the fourth area that I just mentioned is working with the private sector to enable new data sets. I think, and this is, I think, where we can have a lot of conversation about how does the private sector and the government come together to decide what's the data we need. To get to Senator Warner's comments, we really have to know what's valuable here. Are we collecting data on printing that nobody cares about, or are we collecting the data that's really important to decisions that are being made? So, a lot of interesting questions on the table, and I'm really glad to be here with such a great panel.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you for having me here today. Thank you to the Center for Data Innovation for sponsoring this event. And thank you to Mark. We had a fascinating conversation a couple of weeks ago about our various approaches to data in the public and private sector, and how do we motivate employees to be excited about collecting data. And I was sharing with Mark that the way we do it is having our employees focus on the good that we're trying to provide for a specific persona out in the world, whether that's a home buyer or Rachel or renter. And that's what motivates us to create data products. It's a really interesting discussion. I've repeated it to many people since then, so that was terrific. So at Zillow, we're passionate about data. It sounds a little cliche, but it's true. And when Senator Warner was talking about running the government according to managing to metrics, it's exactly what we do on a much smaller scale, obviously, so it's a little bit easier for us. But internally we manage our business based on data. When I run the people organization at Zillow, and when I interview candidates and they ask what sort of decision-making processes do you employ, I say, well, data wins. It's the number one way we run our business. We look at tons and tons of data. Sometimes we decide we've looked at it in a way that's no longer relevant to running our business, but mostly if there's a tie, data wins. We're very metrics driven. It's really the DNA of Zillow is around empowering people with data. Our founders founded Expedia before they founded Zillow, and they founded Expedia out of a frustration of being fed data by an intermediary in the travel business. Many of you remember the old days when you wanted to go somewhere, you picked up the phone, you called your travel agent, and they said, well, you can leave at 5 a.m. and pay $500, or you can leave at 6 p.m. and pay $2,000. Which do you want to do? So those were the bad old days of travel. Nowadays you have almost too many choices available to you. So our founders founded Zillow because after leaving Expedia, they were both shopping for a home. And they were horrified to learn that, just like in the old days of travel, there really wasn't very much publicly available information about real estate. So they sought to turn on the lights, is what we call it. Essentially, the image we like to paint is, imagine you're looking at homes with your real estate agent, and your agent is holding the flashlight. What you really want to do is just grab the flashlight out of her hand and flip on the light switch. So that's how we think about our business, is we turn on the lights by providing all kinds of data for consumers. And it actually just starts with data. For us, we think about kind of a continuum of data, starting with data, then information, then insights. So data is what we collect from many, many sources, from state and local governments, of course from the federal government, from a lot of private partnerships. And we start with those little bits of nuggets and we put them out there for consumers. Then we try to put a little bit of context around them and make them a little bit more actionable by turning them into what we think of more as information. So it's one thing for you to know what the home you're looking at sold for last time. That's interesting. But a lot more context can be provided if you get to look at the whole neighborhood and find out what all of the recent sales in the neighborhood have been. Suddenly you have actionable information that can help you make a decision. Then you take that a step further, and how can we provide some predictive tools to some consumer insights that are actionable? And we think of these as data insights that we build for folks to be able to make decisions on a more prospective basis, or to narrow in on a very specific decision that they're trying to make by providing context for the data and context for information, and then providing our own guidance around what we think this means by doing a lot of data analysis. We have a very large team of economists and data scientists at Zillow, and they work very hard to try and empower consumers with information, which is our mission. for us, fundamentally, creating this data is, the essential purpose for us is to give it away for free. And of course, we run a business and we do make money in other ways, but the mission around what we have done is to provide data for free. And I know, Mark, you were referring to that earlier, that the government provides data for free. We do the same thing. All of our data products that we provide, all of the decision-making tools that we build for consumers. The idea is we want people to be able to come to Zillow and educate themselves about the most important financial and personal decisions they're making, which are around, buying a home, renting a home, getting a mortgage. So we spend a lot of time trying to think of new and different ways to present data. We have drawn some really interesting conclusions from data. Senator Warner was talking earlier about crushing student debt. So with all of the information that we've created, we've been able to present questions like, why don't millennials buy houses? Well, as it turns out, a lot of them don't buy houses because they're underemployed and have massive student debt. So while we can't provide an answer or a solution to that problem, we rely on people like Senator Warner to come up with those solutions. We can provide an analysis of what we really think is happening in the market. We also operate our business in a way that creates a perpetual cycle of data creation. We monitor a lot of site behavior. We see what kinds of homes consumers are looking at. We allow consumers to claim their homes and improve the information that we have. And this just creates a bigger and bigger repository of data that just gets better and better, and we're able to do much more things about it. We can predict things like, if you own a modern home versus a traditional home, is it going to appreciate in value more quickly in the next 5 years? Because we see the homes that people are looking at, and we draw conclusions about that data. We can look at things like, based upon IP addresses, how many foreign buyers are looking in a particular market. It's very interesting. We can see where those buyers are coming from. It tells us a lot about what might be going on in their home countries and why they're choosing to make investments in the United States. Really super interesting information. So that's a little Zillow primer. I hope it didn't come off too much like a commercial, but the real reason that we're here is because we're very reliant on the data that the Commerce Department and other agencies provide for us. To give you some examples, we use Census Bureau data. We use the decennial census and the American Community Survey to create most of our indices, actually. Our rents estimates rely on those. Our Zillow Home Value Index relies on that. We use the current population surveys to track home ownership rates by age cohort. Again, this gets back to this notion of looking at millennials and seeing why they're engaging in certain behavior. We rely on a lot of outside data for us to draw those conclusions. We use the Census geographic data files in a way that is very complex, and I don't understand it, but it helps us to create information on our website so that consumers can build a full picture of the neighborhood that they choose. We also, again, getting back to student debt, we use the New York Fed's Consumer Credit Panel data. This feeds into our analysis of what's happening in the market. How do we keep the housing market, marching forward? Because it does create significant weakness in the market. You have a whole age cohort of people who are not participating. Our most popular is the Zillow Home Value Forecast, and as I said, that uses a significant amount of federal government data, and it's our most consumed data product at Zillow. We also use a lot of local data sources, some private, some public. We look at data from schools, we look at crime data. Someday perhaps we'll look at crime data from the city of Chicago. I'm sure that would be very interesting to us. We have lists and lists of data integration projects that we would like to undertake to make our consumer information more useful. One thing that springs immediately to mind is, in San Francisco at least, our weather is neighborhood by neighborhood. So incorporating some NOAA data about how foggy my neighborhood is going to be would be very valuable to us. And similarly, enhancing our crime data, our schools data, all of those things require partnership with local, state, and federal governments. I'm going to skip forward a little bit here, but I think that fundamentally for us, as government initiatives, expand and contract, it's really important to give credence to what Mark was saying about the value that is created in the economy based upon these data sets that you're collecting. And as you pointed out, there are fundamentally certain data sets that only the government can create. We believe strongly in a private-public partnership, but there are certain things that as a private entity, we simply can't knock on every door in the United States and gather information about individuals. It not only would be a scale we could not undertake, but it would be distasteful to a lot of people for us to be doing that. So with that, I will turn it over.
So again, thanks for having me here. Pleasure to be here with everybody else today. So my job is to think end-to-end about data and the city of Chicago. And just as in a way that there's a technology officer that oversees end-to-end, what does the technology look like? In the same way somebody's thinking about security end-to-end, what should that look like? If we truly believe that data is an asset, data is something that we need to be using strategically for our own value, then you need to have somebody as a consequence to be thinking about that. How are we going to use data from the moment it stores, from the moment it ends up in our technology center to the point of analytics, to the point of publication, to the point of it being generated in a report somewhere. And that's what me and my team think about. But data itself really came in with Mayor Emanuel when he came in 2011. I'm going to talk about open data exclusively today, but when he came in, coming from being chief of staff when data.gov was launched at the federal government, coming in, and the line was in the transition report, if we are going to encourage business, we need to be thinking about the management of our own house, and we need to show that to others. And so open government has always been this hybrid between transparency and also business development. Even in that transition report, transparency and business development was mentioned in the same line. So as that started, we began to really kick off our open data portal. To now over 600 data sets. We have every single crime committed in the city of Chicago from 2003 to 2001 till last week. We have energy consumption data down to the census block by the building type, by the month, by the energy type it is, whether it's kilowatt hours or therms. We have automated water data from all the beaches in the city of Chicago that report back every hour what's the temperature, what's the turbidity, Wikipedia that, what's the clarity of the water, what's the wave height, what's the wavelength. So sometimes you get these waves in the lake, and it's always interesting to go pull that up and see what it looks like. And then there's many other things such as performance metrics and traditional transparency. That our most popular data set of all those kind of interesting things, our most popular data set, of course, is the list of all the employees and their salaries, which is continually month after month our most popular. So, but in terms of what does this do for everybody else, I want to talk about the entrepreneurship angle, business development angle, what it has done for our tech community, and what it has done for research and the research that's enabled. So within entrepreneurship, certainly there's companies that use it. Zillow use data like this, and many other companies do as well. And so one type of company we see using data for business purposes are these aggregation companies, not unlike Zillow, which is taking information, adding value on top of that, and then be able to provide services, customer support maybe, on top of this data. And maybe they go FOIA other cities' data to bring in other information from surrounding neighborhoods that do not have data portals. But that's becoming less and less as there's now estimated to 150 to 200 cities with open data portals. Now as you get to the larger municipalities that have open data portals, now we're getting to the 300 and some odd cities across the United States that have over $1 million, or 1 million people, but not megalopolises in other ways. So we have companies like Construction Monitor who monitor all of our building permit data, which gets automatically refreshed every single day, because they sell sales leads. And if you're going to think, well, who am I going to sell lead equipment to? Well, somebody who's recently filed for a building permit would be a very good start. And other companies as well take the information from our portal and resell that, provide services on top of it. We also have local companies, such as a company called DataMate. DataMate is a company that takes data and turns into information. So they specialize in visualizations. It's much a web consultancy company with a statistics and data visualization angle on top of it. And they've built great websites. They've recently worked with a local nonprofit to create a website called Large Lots. And Large Lots is a website where you can go to sign up to buy vacant properties for $1 as part of a city initiative that we have. They've recently teamed up with the Sun-Times to build a website called the Influencer Report, which takes lobbyist registration data and shows how much money is in different funds for aldermen around the city. You see how much influence that they may have, where influence is in this case measured by dollars. But also it's been interesting to see news organizations use open data. As news organizations make the transition from their traditional print media over to digital media, one of the angles that they've taken is by simply allowing readers to explore data on themselves. And I think one of the best examples, of course, is the New York Times. Show up on election day on the New York Times, and they allow you to simulate who's going to take control of the Senate or the House, and they allow you to kind of go through your own scenarios. Well, if they take Iowa, what else would they need to take to be able to complete some sort of success? So it's been allowing people to engage within that, and certainly our local news organizations have done that as well. Chicago Tribune has been using our crime data to create a website called Crime in Chicagoland, where they allow people to click on your neighborhood and try to explore the trends, the patterns of crime in your neighborhood, and allowing people to experience that, to try to relate to it, and more than just a spreadsheet that looks like it's on a website somewhere. And that leads to our overall civic development community. We have 50 or 60 people just show up Tuesday nights to talk about data and government. Some of these people have founded startups that have been sold to Google for a number of multi-millions of dollars. We have a lot of high-frequency traders there trying to save their souls and volunteer their time. But you have this very active community, and I mentioned earlier that the Open Data Portal is a town square, and that is the case. It's not the entire community, but people show up to it. And what's also been very important is the research that is enabled. We've been able to have universities, and we've worked with every single college in the Chicagoland area to give data to so they can work on classroom examples, and certainly real-life examples that impact their cities that does engage students. But we've also worked with professors for more serious research projects where we aim to improve the efficiency of city operations. But it's also enabled things, such as the Array of Things, which is a mesh network of sensors that we're going to be building in the Loop area of Chicago, collecting information about the environment. It's going to be collecting information about temperature, weather, and it's going to be published on our data portal as well. So in supplement to NOAA data and other data that's certainly available, you're going to have free information, access to micro weather information throughout at least the Loop area. But we use open data as well, and we use a lot of federal open data. We, at the very least, always want to know what the populations are at smaller geographies, and sometimes that's not possible. And we've been challenged a little bit recently from losing the long-form census. Is if we want to keep track of what are the educational levels of various different occupations within various particular neighborhoods, because we're worried about the impact of economic activity, such as a recession, because we know it impacts construction and manufacturing disproportionately more than anything else. The data that we have to rely upon is becoming less and less accurate. Standard errors are becoming growing more and more. That puts us into a disadvantaged position. And more once we've been talking about how do we make up for the gap of federal data we no longer receive, because it is a huge gap for our policy analysts, for people like myself, for people that sit in the mayor's office. And so open data is crucial, and one of the ways that you know when it's crucial is when you lose something of the questions that you realize you can't answer anymore. And so certainly we're a consumer of that. But as we go forward, we're excited to see other people engage in open data and how people use our data. We hope the federal government uses our data more frequently. We often report things to federal government for various different initiatives, whether it's the Perkins Act or whatever it might be. We're excited to see people be able to leverage open data to perhaps meet those needs, to get information from us as opposed to trying to package it up and send it to different institutions. As we go forward, Chicago is going to be continuing to expand the number of data sets. We're going to be focusing on value. We're going to be we're always interested in how people are going to use it, so we can release information that people can use on a day-to-day basis. So again, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Tom.
Wow, that was really great, Tom. Mark and Dan, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this fantastic panel. I'm really excited to be here and to hear these great stories about data. I guess I have been working at IBM for 20 years and working with data for 20 years. Is it on? You want to close it? Thank you. IBM is both a consumer of open data. We are a solution provider. and we are increasingly a producer of open data. I want to tell you a little bit about my journey in regards to all these three things. It started about a year ago. A colleague of mine in California, in San Francisco, called me up one day and told me, Steve, you got to come out here. We got this thing going on called a hackathon. How many of you have been to a hackathon? Do the rest of you know, how many of you know what a hackathon is? Okay, then I'm going to have to explain it. Last August, I didn't know what it was. Just the words hackathon together in a single word just dismayed me. It was enough to get me to get on an airplane and fly out to California, where I went to the Code for America offices and participated in a 3-hour session in which the CTO for San Francisco walked in with a USB stick, and he had the entire city code for San Francisco on the stick. And he asked an assembled group of about 40 or 50 hackers to please go at it and to find some constructive uses for this piece of information. It was all the laws that the San Francisco City Council had passed for 30 years. And they brainstormed a bunch of different approaches, and they separated out into different teams, and then I watched them in 3 hours bang out some prototype applications. And I was really amazed. I had never seen anything like that before. Two things really amazed me. One were that private citizens were volunteering to participate in activity which was augmenting government services, helping to use their technology skills to improve or to do things the government itself couldn't do. And two, that they were able to do anything with a computer in 3 hours that was meaningful. I saw some guys put together like a semantic search engine looking at all the enumerated powers that have been granted to different officers of the city over the last 30 years. I don't think anybody had ever done that before, because those powers were written in paper, and nobody had the time or energy to go through all the different paper laws to figure out what the powers were. From that experience, I went down into Silicon Valley and I met with two cities that at that time would prove pivotal for me to understanding open data. The first was Palo Alto, a little tiny city that does some amazing things with open data. They're going through, they're doing an inventory of all their open data, of all their municipal assets in open data. Trees, stop signs, streets, water pipes, gas pipes, and they're looking at using URIs, Universal Resource Indicators, to identify these assets. And for Palo Alto and San Francisco, open data was about how can we describe our environment and get citizens to participate in the city to augment services. Then I met with another city, San Jose, who told me, see, we don't really like the hackathon thing. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of activity, produces a lot of ideas, but for us, open data is about government transformation. We're transforming the way we work with data today by focusing increasingly on just publishing it. Instead of working on application development ourselves, we're understanding that if we publish high-quality data and make it available to citizens, citizens will step in and develop applications for themselves, to Mark's point earlier and to Tom's point as well, stimulating economic growth by finding valuable uses for data that government is either too slow or unable to figure out itself. And that's, I think, a really fascinating idea, that government is learning to transform itself by refocusing its IT and application energies. And that, for me, as I went forward over the last year, I've become a co-chair of the W3C working group on data on the web best practices, where we're looking at developing new open data standards to enable governments around the world to publish open data in common formats so that it can be comparable. So that, for example, Chicago could publish open data and somebody in Gary could share it, or somebody in Hoboken could look at open data for transportation information and understand it from New York, so that we might have regional data that you could look at and understand how cities are connected to each other, how people move back and forth, where pollution goes, air quality, water, etc. So we're trying to develop standards for that. I joined the Open Government Partnership, which is an Obama administration initiative to spread open government and open data around the world. I had the distinction of having dinner with two cabinet ministers at the Open Government Partnership meeting in Dublin. Francis Maud, who is a Thatcherite Tory from the UK government, about as conservative as you can get, sitting next to Brendan Howlin, who is a super liberal Labour minister from Ireland. And on this topic of open data, there was absolutely no ideological separation. I've seen the most conservative, the most liberal government ministers from around the world all agreeing that we have to open up our data, we have to open up our governments. It is an imperative for democracy, it's an imperative for all of us, and it's absolutely fascinating. In August, I worked together with the administration to host the Africa Open Data Jam as part of the Africa Leaders Summit, where we invited members from the 8 African countries who are part of OGP to sit down together with a bunch of technologists from IBM and other companies in the United States and work on open data solutions. We worked with the Department of Agriculture to create an SMS application using our recently announced Bluemix platform. Bluemix is a platform as a service application development environment in which you don't need to install any software on your computer. You can just go to the Bluemix website, you can download, you can arrange different application components together and rapidly deploy them to the cloud without worrying about what server you need, what virtual machine, what cluster, what performance. It takes care of it, all of it for you. And in 4 days, I had a Bluemix team from IBM develop an SMS application for farmers in Africa. Across Africa, there's not a lot of agricultural data. You know, in the United States, we take agricultural data for granted because we have this fabulous USDA that captures so much information about what crops we produce, what maturity date, what yield, what their prices are to market. A lot of countries around the world don't have that luxury. They don't have the data management practices, they don't have governments in place for long enough to capture it. But we need that information today, and so the U.S. Department of Agriculture created the GODAN program, Global Open Data for Agriculture and Nutrition Program. Because with the planet reaching 9 billion people by 2050, and with global warming, we know we need more agricultural security, otherwise we don't know how much food we're producing, we won't be able to feed everybody. So the program is out there trying to create new inventories of agricultural assets. How much food are we producing and in which countries? But the governments don't have that data, so we need people to provide that information. So we developed an SMS application using Bluemix to survey farmers about their crops. And we hope to work together with USDA and different countries around the world to enable people to inventory this type of information and build a comprehensive database, open data, available to everyone about how much food is being produced in which countries and how. As I said, we're also a consumer of open data. We use, as IBM produces record numbers of patents every year, we're very grateful for the work of the U.S. Patent Office to do, what is it called? Prior art checks on patents. We also use health data in our Watson applications. What else do we use? I can't remember the list actually of all the data that else we use. And recently, as of July 1st, we've become an open data publisher. One of the things that I've seen from many of the cities like Chicago and governments like Department of Commerce is just how much fun it is to publish open data. And I wanted to learn about that firsthand. So I worked together with, we had a request, I think, from the government of Austria to publish some open data as part of a new portal they set up. And so we used that request as an opportunity to develop an open data publishing process internally, a data governance process to identify what kinds of data sets we could publish, under what conditions, who signs off on it to get legal and privacy approval. And on July 1st, we published our first 4 data sets. They're not really meaningful data sets, they're kind of small. It wasn't really the point of, that this is earth-shattering data like these guys are collecting, but rather that a private organization could do it and how they could do it. And we're looking now at setting up our own data portal, really for the purpose of learning of how to do it and what it looks like, so that we can be in the same shoes as our customers.
Great. Well, thank you. So everyone on the panel so far has mentioned this need for greater collaboration and partnership between the public sector and the private sector. So at the center, we're all about making progress on the mission. We'll really dig into that for a moment. What should the government be doing? We'll start with our 2 government folks a little bit. What can government do at this point to start working with these new data sources, or to find out what exactly it is the private sector needs?
So when it comes to to partnering with the private sector, it falls into a couple different buckets. One is in terms of data delivery. So I mentioned, for instance, the weather example, right? Most of you don't go to weather.gov. Some of you might, but it's like an old fixed Courier font, or that's what weather.gov is. Instead, you go to weather.com, so that way, the government is partnering with the private sector in terms of the data delivery. And as we get more and more data, and so, I recommend you go to the City of Chicago's kind of website, their open data website. It's really good. So how do we actually get our information out as we release more and more information? We're going to have to partner with the private sector, just because the tools that say, IBM is developing, for instance, they're just changing so rapidly. It's hard for us to keep up. If I look at Zillow, for instance, there's no way to get people coming close to that. So we have to partner with the private sector in terms of the data delivery part. Then in terms of our data products, how do we partner with the private sector, which is a different bucket? We have to start looking at a lot of different private sector data sets to figure out what's going on. I'll give you just one example. That is like when it comes to the economy. What's really happening in the economy now? The way we currently do it is we send out surveys, we get responses, we get survey responses, we publish data with a lag. And that's just not really a sustainable model for a couple of reasons. So can we partner with a company like Zillow to get a better sense for what's currently happening in certain segments of the real estate market, for instance? Can we tap into the fine-tuning systems like third-party networks and really figure out what's going on now? And so I think this is just really exciting stuff. And we have a lot of agencies who are just really beginning to put their toes in the water in lots of different areas. And we begin to coordinate a little bit better. But if we think about what the government's going to be doing in terms of data 10 years from now, it's really been really quite different than what we're doing today.
Yeah, so on my side, I think we need to listen. We need to see where there's opportunity, where there's value in data that we may have that can be released to the public, which can fulfill some sort of need. It could be capitalized for value from private businesses. But sometimes to be able to do that, we need to let people know what data we have. And then we also need to listen, government needs to listen to what might be most valuable. Of all the different data sources we have 100 different databases that are maintained throughout the city of Chicago alone. Of all that information, of all what we can release, what should we release first? And that's a big task. We're trying to get everything out, but to prioritize things on top, we need to figure out what's the most valuable. And so frequent conversations with the private sector to indicate what's most valuable can help us prioritize those things first. And so we've actually started to publish information of everything we do have. And certainly the federal government's doing the same thing under the executive order that was signed a year or two ago now, I forget, of releasing catalog information about data sources we have. We've done something where we release a data dictionary. So in addition to data that we actually release, data.cityofchicago.org, we also have a website called datadictionary.cityofchicago.org, which provides a Google-like interface to all of the city's metadata. Now we're slowly releasing information. We're not all the way there yet. It's a project that will never be 100% done, but we built out an open source platform. First piece of software I've ever seen to allow people to explore metadata that was supposed to be for end users. If there's a press officer, if there's somebody in policy, anybody should be able to take a look at what's in the metadata. And simply what it's supposed to be, do we collect X? It's supposed to be able to provide the answer, do we collect X? And who has X? What system contains X? And to be able to have that information out there, we can have a better dialogue about what we do have and what might be valuable. I can imagine one day, we haven't released the API yet, but we'll have an API one day very soon. One day somebody creating an upvote website to show which data do you like most, what should we release first. That's always the example I can imagine being first, because ultimately, I can dream of different things that might be valuable, but I don't know. That's what the creative people out deciding to gamble everything and starting startups, that's their job. And it's not something I can spend my time thinking the whole time.
Well, I can tell you we take that job very seriously. To echo what you said and what Mark said, part of it is, I would actually say the bulk of it is communication. We spend a lot of time talking with folks in government about the way we use information, which we hope educates them about what we find valuable. But out of those conversations, inevitably, some nugget will be unearthed about information that's produced that we didn't even know about, and we can think about really cool ways that we can So I think dialogue is really important, and you know, we are lucky to be able to have reached a scale that we get to spend a lot of time with our counterparts in government at all levels. That's a little harder for smaller companies to do, but it's something that I think is really important. The other important area of partnership is data standardization. As Stephen alluded to, being able to present data across all agencies, across all levels of government in a standardized way is important, not only for the reasons that he cited about being able to cut the data as you're doing analysis in different ways that may spill over city lines or county lines or state lines, but also because it creates a greater incentive for development. The hackathon idea is one that is very widespread. We host hackathons at Zillow. If you want people to really put money behind an idea and invest heavily in a technology platform, it needs to be affordable. And it's one thing for somebody to build a nifty tool that can translate the code of San Francisco, but if you could create an incentive for someone to build a business that would do that with every code in the US because they're all online and all in the same format and easily consumable, that's hugely valuable. Understandably, it's a big challenge to get everyone to cooperate, but if we could just start perhaps at a federal level so that cross-agency information is presented in some standard format, that would be really helpful.
Can you just speak to the data standards issue with Zillow? I haven't had it, because if I remember correctly, it wasn't Zillow Texas, Zillow New York, it was just Zillow beginning. Did you have data standards issues?
Yes, we have a massive team of people. We still have data standards issues. We have a very large team of technology and business people who work on translating data from disparate sources to be able to present in a uniform way. There are still challenges with that. There are challenges with some states don't produce home data to the public at all. Formatting is one issue. The other is just access. But yes, certainly it's a daily challenge. We have the whole data integrity team that's all they work on.
And Stephen, maybe if you can also just talk a little bit about the incentives here. Are there sufficient incentives for the private sector to partner in this space, or how could those incentives be better aligned?
I think that the incentive of free data is certainly quite enough. At the same time, I think we're all just learning to use this data. And first I would say we want to get more of it out there. We want government to publish more data. We need more data. Some people say we're drowning in data, but I would say no, we don't have enough. And I think we're all just beginning to realize that even government itself doesn't have all the data that we need. And there are lots of private organizations like Zillow, like some of the other data aggregators that should also be publishing open data. And that there are probably lots of organizations that want to look at what is the Commerce Department publishing, the SEC, the Federal Reserve, the Treasury Department, what private corporations are publishing, to begin to get much more accurate and faster snapshots of the American economy in different sectors. At W3C, we're working at a new set of open data standards based on DCAT, technical metadata standards, vocabularies. We call it DCAT Plus. We're also looking at industry-specific vocabularies on top of it. So for example, I mentioned earlier about GODAN, this global open data for agriculture and nutrition. There are no widely accepted agricultural data standards. So we're looking at how can we create that so that as we inventory agricultural information around the world, we'll do so in a commonly accepted standard format that everybody else will be able to contribute to and read. And we think that as other industries approach the issue of data standardization, both in government and private industry, we'll start to develop more of these types of vocabularies so that data will be easily consumed and analyzed, and the results themselves might be open data in the future.
I want to open it up for questions from the audience, but first I have just one last question, I think particularly for Mark. And that's on this issue of kind of, you did this great report on the value of government data, and I think you needed to do it because it's not always apparent that this value is there. And so, you talked about the weather example, and I was on a plane recently, and they had the free Wi-Fi, and there was a little, this weather information brought to you by weather.com. And weather.com got the credit, even though there was some other people obviously involved in there. And so, we're obviously here at Congress. They were making the funding decision on this kind of thing. what needs to happen so that this value is really recognized? I mean, data is this public good that we can't measure. It's not like a bridge where you can say this is how many people went across the bridge. The whole point of it is you share it without restriction. How do we balance these kind of competing needs?
That's an excellent question, and we have a real challenge in that we can't tell people that they have to cite attribution, right? We can't tell whether they're confident to say this data comes from no. And if we could, it'd still be difficult because often people will take our data and massage it in a certain way, in a different format. That's the value proposition that the companies are providing. So instead, I think we have to have a lot more forums like this, for instance. We just have to do a lot more education to let people know. Because you're right, when you're driving down a federal, say, interstate, you know that it's a federal interstate that you're on. When you're using our information, you don't know it's from us. And so this is a big challenge. We're really open to ideas on this, on how we can get more branding out there. Some companies are being, when we talk to them, maybe they'll start putting, hey, this comes from the American Community Survey, for instance, and I think a little presentation we did that recently. But, it's going to be hard to get companies to really do this. So I think we just have to have much more communications with the folks, say, especially on capital appropriators, so we can say, hey, no, the value, this is really good use of taxpayer dollars, right? That's, I believe that from my whole heart and soul. But if you all have ideas on how we can do this, we can do it.
Floor is open for questions, yes. Could you just say your name and affiliation? And we have microphones up here.
Thank you. Myron Stratt, with the National Academy. You haven't mentioned privacy. Government data from individuals and businesses must stand behind a wall of privacy protection. Does that impede collaboration? And today we see the walls are eroding and stricter measures need to be taken. What do you see as the future?
I would like to hear from especially the private sector folks who on this. So when it comes to privacy, we have a perfect track record of taking in data on individual businesses, on individuals, and their families, and then not releasing privately identifiable information. So we're really good at this, producing just aggregate information. But we're always getting pushed, and Tom alluded to this in his comments, we're getting pushed to release information in greater detail. So that's always the balance we have. So for government, we can only do so much. So then there's a question so in terms of additional information we can provide at a granular level, we're always going to be kind of restricted for that reason. Maybe what we can do with researchers, we have researchers come in and use our data. They use that PII information, but they release then just the results. Like, what are the relationships? What is the relationships, say, between millennials and selected behavior? Looking at that granular information, you could yield insights. So then you're releasing the relationship information, but you're not releasing information on the individual. So we have to explore that more. We're doing more on that front. We're working with other federal agencies on how people can come in and access their data through kind of these data enclaves.
We have a number of hands, so we'll do one panel response unless Willie has something on any of these questions. But yeah.
So Mike Kruger, Department of Commerce. Mike Kruger, Department of Commerce. I'm the Director of Digital Engagement, so my job is to engage with companies. There are, as Mark alluded to, 6 million of them, and you noted that there's more communication. Do you have thoughts on how I might split up my time to meet 6 million companies? But in all seriousness, what is the most effective way in which to talk with as many companies as possible in the 24 hours a day I have?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're not going to get to all of them. I think public forums like this are probably the best way, media outreach, things like that. I mean, there are many of us in the private industry whose charge is to monitor what's happening out in the world. So a lot of it is, if you put information out there about an input you're looking for, we will react to that. A lot of times, though, I would never have known your role existed and that you wanted to hear from us. But to the extent you can make more public appeals for information and why it's useful and how it might be actionable and benefit businesses in the future, I think you'll hear back from people.
Hi, Andrew Reamer with George Washington University. 2 years ago on the House floor, Congressman Daniel Webster got up and said the American Community Survey is a symbol of everything that's wrong with Washington. And he proposed that Congress approve an amendment to appropriations that would prohibit spending on the American Community Survey, essentially killing it. And it passed the House. There was a lot of us in the room were involved in making sure that it passed the Senate. The question for Kathleen is, to what extent was Zillow aware of this activity, given your dependence on the ACS? And going forward, what are your thoughts about informing Congress and about the importance of data to your business?
Right. So I can't answer your question specifically whether we were aware of that. I assume that we were. We've been very active in DC and in state and local governments for the past 5 years or so. So my guess is yes, we probably were aware of that. And I think we need to play a big role in encouraging government to continue the activities that they're engaging in as far as surveying from the census and beyond. I personally have been spending a lot of time here in DC, as have a number of my colleagues. We have hosted forums ourselves here trying to do outreach with folks in the government. Senator Warner has been a particular supporter of our efforts. And we've tried to put ourselves in a position so that we can educate and influence about the value of that information.
Second row. Sorry, and then you'll be the next.
Okay. Sorry.
Thanks very much. I'm Kitty Smith. I'm with the Council of Professional Associations on Federal Statistics, which you may not have known existed. Kudos to the Center for Innovation Data and the Department of Commerce for putting this on. It's excellent. And I think you've done a fabulous job in examining the commercial value of these public data. But I also want to mention that many of those who collect the data are motivated by the fact that they are critical to political decision making, and with better political decisions, you also affect businesses, the economy, the social welfare of the population. So I just wanted to bring that other dimension in and wonder if anybody's working on valuing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So another one of the functionalities of our team is where we have a team of researchers, myself included, who work on optimization problems within Chicago, and also responding to problems that policy problems that pop up, where we apply advanced analytics to uncover what the underlying cause might be, to indicate what problems might be throughout the city. But we also just work on operational efficiency. One of the things we do is we try to forecast when something's going to happen in Chicago, and we dispatch crews based on our projections. And we have working models of where there's trucks that get sent out based on information we publish to an internal website that a manager looks at and uses. So absolutely, it's for our own internal efficiency as well, in addition to things that people can use.
Good afternoon. Great panel discussion. Thank you very much. Michael Joseph with Prime Dimensions. So we are an early stage analytics firm, and we find that the job growth that you mentioned is good and the opportunities are good, but there has been talk of a skills gap in this area with regard to analytics, big data, different types of data structures, and making sense of that. And the developers that you mentioned at the hackathon, we probably need more of those and more folks at that. So maybe from an economics perspective and a technical perspective, what do you see at IBM and just the country more broadly about the skills gap?
Yeah, I think there is. I think everyone recognizes that there is more broadly a tech skills gap. And I guess I would say, I would hope that the discussion we're having today, which I really want to applaud Mark Thompson, Commerce Department. This is the second one of these events that I've attended, the first back in June, and they've just been fantastic. And I think it's tremendous leadership to take on the communication about the importance of open data more broadly across government. But I hope that what we'll get to in the near future isn't just about private corporations using government data, but that American public will start to use data. And I think it's incumbent on us in the IT industry to start providing tools that make it easier for citizens to consume and want to consume open data, to start looking at, you know, you talked about the salaries that are published, and everyone likes to look at what their cities are paying their employees. I recall there was a story in, I think it was in Los Angeles, where the controller published the budget data about the city. And that caused many people in the city, private citizens, to start looking at the budget data to see how the money was being spent. And lots of questions coming into the controller's office about, somebody noticed that there was a $200,000 line item for a Rolls Royce. People wanted to know why the mayor needed a Rolls Royce. So it turned out that he had a helicopter that used Rolls Royce engines, and they needed a new engine. But publishing that data in a consumable form, that meant they put it in tables and charts and graphs, easy to consume. And I think that's the challenge that we all have, is to try to make open data easier to consume. Data tables, aren't that exciting to read. Catalogs full of data aren't that exciting to read. But I hope that we hope certainly through tools like Bluemix, that we'll be able to make this information much more consumable. And in the future, we'll be having larger discussions online, virtually, with lots of American citizens who are talking to us about the data that they're using, about more information that they want to have, or about the quality of the information, or about its availability, about increasing the amount of time or decreasing the amount of time for government to publish it, that we'll be able to engage the public beyond the corporations in the use of open data.
Great time for one more question.
First, thank you very much to Commerce and the Data Innovation Center for putting this on. My name is Bernadette Highland. I'm from 3 Round Stones, and I've been working in the area of open data and government publication of open data for about 7 years. Kathleen, I'm delighted to hear that you say there are people here from Zillow who are talking to government about what you need. I would suggest, as a small company that has been involved in very leading edge development of this, we need more big companies who put their money where their mouth is. And I know it's a bit of a quandary that larger companies are in, more the established federal systems integrators, because they have $65 million 3-year gigs with the various government agencies, and they don't really want to jeopardize those because they've been the gatekeepers to the data in the Oracle database. But to the extent that private sector could get more involved in working with government, educating, working with small companies who are innovators, working with the W3 and other standards communities, I think that's really, really critical, and it's really missing. And Europe and the UK are kicking our butt because they have that level of collaboration and collegiality in working together. The fact that the W3 doesn't actually have a person who's sort of down in the DC area is shocking. But I think if more innovative companies like Zillow said, hey, we really need participation in a person on the ground from a nonprofit who doesn't have, well, they have a pony in the fight, a dog in the fight, but they don't have a side, they're nonpartisan. That would be extremely helpful.
Well, thank you for that comment, and I guess we'll end on that note. I want to thank Senator Warner's office again for hosting us, and the Department of Commerce for being